Welcome, everybody. This is Pasture Poultry Talk, episode 96. I am your host, Mike Badger. Today, I want to bring you inside a consulting call that I actually did a year before I'm actually publishing it. I know, right? Crazy. I held on to it. But the background here is on one of my podcasts, I made it an appeal that if you want to chat with me for 30 minutes, you can. The only caveat is that I may use it in a podcast. I had some people take advantage of that. One of them was Jonathan Elliott, who works at Whiffletree Farm in Virginia. Good farm family down there. Jesse Strait is another name that you might know from that farm. So we had a conversation. The subject was turkey processing. So this was very timely. It's very timely to when I'm going to release this episode now. And we're going to cover a lot of ground on this. Basically, the premise is they had problems doing some turkey processing, and they didn't think that they should. So, and I agreed with them. They shouldn't. So we worked through, we just troubleshot. That's what you're going to hear most in this episode is a lot of troubleshooting, some questions, some pontification, some clarification, some hacks and ideas, all the way from the scalder through the plucker. And you'll see that we focus a lot on the scalder, but the premise of the initial opening here that Jonathan lays out for us is turkeys need 5 or 10 minutes of hand plucking after they come out of their plucker. Man, that is crazy. And we just go from there. We solve it. And I actually have the benefit now of hearing back from Jonathan after he went back and they did their processing in 2018, right? They did their processing in 2018, reported back and said, that really worked. That's fantastic. And then he provided some additional information to me about some other observations they made as they were processing. And I'll share that actually in a different episode. I'm going to follow this episode up with kind of a checklist style turkey processing episode after this. So we're going to talk through the troubleshooting process, and you're going to get a lot of information here, I think, about how to deal with turkeys on processing day for Thanksgiving, which is very, very timely to when we're going to release it. As I record here, we're just at the early part of October. So a lot of turkeys are going to be hanging between now and then. So let's go ahead, jump into the conversation with Jonathan, and we get right to it, folks. Enjoy.
Just to kind of give you a sense of what we're working with, the birds we're doing are just the broad-breasted white. We're raising them to, 16 to 19 weeks. We'll do them over successive Saturdays. The average dressed weight is going to be about 16 pounds, I think. That's what it was last year, at least. We'll have some small ones, some big ones, but just in general, about 16 pounds. And then our equipment, we're using our scalder is a Poultry Man scalder. I think it's the 41-inch one, so it's got the 2 burners underneath. We have 2 pluckers, the Pro and the Pro XL, and we generally just use the XL for the turkeys. I can only fit about 1 turkey in the regular Pro.
How many do you put in the XL?
Usually been doing 3 to 4.
Oh, okay.
When we're doing chickens, if we're processing 500 birds, we can get almost all of them without any feathers on, except maybe some of the kind of remnants of the pin feathers, little white bits that stick out. And then maybe half or even more of them, we won't even have the little bits of the pin feathers. So they're, totally clean, don't get many rips going through. But then when it comes time to do turkeys, our experience has been more that there's like a good number of feathers left. So it's taking 5 to 10 minutes to finish off the plucking by hand. They're much more sensitive. I found like getting kind of either torn skin or just kind of looks like it's been up against something very abrasive, not like a tear, but just kind of like something really hard has been rubbing on it. Is it possible to kind of consistently get the same results with turkeys as you do with broilers?
So I think so. There's a couple questions in there. How long are you scalding?
Usually, if the temperature's where I want it to be at, I'm going in the 70 to 90 second range.
Okay. And that would be kind of what I would expect. And how does that 2-burner Poultry Man keep up? Does it keep up with the water?
This will be actually the first year doing turkeys. Before the broiler season this year, we We got it upgraded this year to 2 burners. It has kept up with broilers, which it didn't in the past. I was having to do kind of stick some extra propane burners under there.
And you're doing 3 to 4 through there at a time? Is that what you said?
Yes,
Okay.
That's right. I've been doing 3 to 4 because I guess for 2 reasons. One, that just kind of seems to be what fits well in the plucker. But then on that score, I've never really been able to consistently get the turkeys to rotate around in the scalder without it jamming up. The last couple of years, what I've done is basically just I throw the turkeys in with the grate kind of vertical. So you can kind of put 2 turkeys in on each side of the grate and then just kind of hand dunk them for those 70 to 90 seconds.
When you start with the grate even or parallel to the water surface, you're putting 4 turkeys in there and then they get hung up, basically, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So do you keep the feet on the turkeys or do you take them off?
We take them off. I think we started doing that thinking it would help. But it didn't really seem to make that much of a difference. So we take the head and the feet off prior to going into the scalder.
With that scalder, have you tried to do like 2 or 3 and see if it's just, the 4th one is the problem, or have you tried different weights in there, different number of birds?
Not with any sort of intentionality on it.
Sometimes with the turkeys, like one of the problems, their long neck gets stuck in the side of that grate, that platform that rotates.
Yeah.
And usually for that, I make sure the necks are always pointing in. Is a little tip that I picked up because I scalded turkeys in a 30-inch scalder, which is the smaller version to what you have.
Yes.
And I would always need to take off my feet and, like I said, turn the necks in to the middle.
Okay.
And I would be good for 1 to 2 turkeys in that. And I did this with chickens too. But the way that I would load my scalder, I would throw, for example, in your case, you want to do 4 at a time. I'd throw 2 in to the platform and then turn it on. And then as the rack was coming around, I would throw the other 2 on the backside and let it go like that. You just have to get it when it's done. But usually somebody's right there. That might give you some of those clearance issues if that's what you're running into. There's that. And then making sure your water level stays topped off will just make life easier. It'll keep your scald consistent for one thing. And then as those birds rotate through, there's more volume for them to go through. So I know one of the challenges that I had with my 30-inch was turkeys would take a lot of water out and a lot of heat out. So my scalder couldn't keep up. So I boiled water in a turkey fryer to add into it. And that kept my water at temperature and full. So that's the one thing I would make sure that the water level stays full. And, and with chickens, I would add water every 20 birds or so, 25 birds. With turkeys, it was much more frequent than that.
Sure. You would do a whole, like one of those whole turkey fryer pots and just get that to boiling.
That messes around with your temperature a little bit. A lot of times you end up being a little bit too hot. So you have to be on top of that so you can, shorten up the scald time. But I did that primarily because my scalder just would never recover fast enough. I was processing faster than my scalder could heat up.
Sure.
I wouldn't expect with that 41-inch that you'll have that problem. That's one of the reasons they put 2 burners under it was to even out that recovery time.
Yeah. So with the chickens, I always have a hot pot going as well, just for the water level. At this point, with the 2 burners, it's kept up heat wise, but to try to keep that water level up.
I've always have a few pin feathers, like really not even pin feathers. They're really just wingtip feathers are what I've had the most problems with in my turkeys, especially 18 or 19 week old broad-breasted whites. They do scald and pluck pretty easily, but they don't tumble around. You mentioned that problem of the birds not necessarily tumbling as well as they could. And they need to do that to be able to pluck. My gut might be to say that 4 turkeys of that size might be just a touch too much for that plucker. So that fits right in the middle of the Poultry Man line, which Poultry Man has a 27-inch diameter. And I can tell you in that system, I get 1 tom or 2 hens. And occasionally I can force a tom and a hen in there, depending on the size.
Gotcha. And that's on the 27.
Yeah. Now the 35, like I would expect the 35-inch to do those 4 turkeys pretty easily and tumble them around. There's enough space for them to go around and not necessarily always be bumping it, not always touching each other, but have enough mass in there that they would do what they're supposed to do, which is run into each other sometimes and turn the bird around so it plucks that on evenly. Because otherwise you have to reach in there. If they're not spinning and tumbling, you got to reach in there, of course, and hit them or something. And
and that's basically what we did last year, was basically just had one person manning the plucker to keep them bouncing around, because they would just like to kind of get to the outside of the plucker and just kind of sit there as they get spun around. So you think if we went with fewer birds that we might actually get a better kind of bouncing around action?
That would be one thing that I would definitely try, is just take one bird out of there. And I would expect at 32 inches with those size birds, 16 pounds, you should be able to put 3 birds in there, I think. Especially if you got two hens and a tom or something like that. You mentioned torn skin. Usually torn skin is, unless something's really wrong with the plucker, I think torn skin's usually going to be an overscald. It might be one of those things where you're scalding longer to get all those feathers off, and then you're plucking longer, and that combination is tearing some skin for you. Based on what you said about how you're scalding them, I'm wondering if that might contribute to some of that overscald on one part of the bird and maybe not enough on the other. Because sounds like you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you have the platform vertical and you're putting 2 birds on either side, and then are you just kind of like stirring them around, or are you actually dunking them up and down?
I'm dunking them up and down, kind of 2 birds at a time, so one side, then the other, just kind of back and forth, kind of like whack-a-mole. But
yeah, so you're ready for bed that night then?
Yes. It's a little bit of a doozy.
I think that might be contributing to some of that unevenness in the pluck that you're getting. So I would start there in that scalder. Do everything you can, even if it's 3 birds or scalding 2 on either side of the platform and letting them turn like that. But in my experience, that up and down motion, or just when you hand scald, most people want to dunk up and down like that, and that's one of the problems.
I see. I was thinking that the up and down would be close enough to the rotational action.
The rotation gives it agitation, which allows the water to penetrate the follicles. So that's what you're mimicking when you dunk it up and down. The only challenge is if you're doing it by the feet, then you're putting the breast in usually first, and that's some of the more sensitive parts of the bird. And the backside, along the back or the back of the thighs is the part that could be scalded the longest, but that's usually the part that gets the least when you do that method.
That makes sense.
I would say, and I tell people with chickens, it's a little bit different with turkeys, but with chickens, if they're going to manual scald, I always tell people to just drop them in there. And if they have like an oar or a stick or a gloved hand, to just agitate them, like you're stirring soup.
I'll really focus on getting the grate to keep moving, because that makes sense. That might be a big part of sort of the uneven scalding leading to the uneven plucking. In terms of temperature, what are your thoughts there? Is it different than what you do your broilers at, or is there a specific temperature you like?
I use Poultry Man for my scalder too, so that's preset at 147. So I do everything at that set point. The only thing I adjust for is time.
Okay.
With 147 with your birds, I mean, I think you're in that window. I usually start out at the 90-second mark and work from there. So, and I always did it outside. So I don't know. Are you open air or are you in a building?
Yeah, we're open air. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a little bit crazy. You never know what the weather's going to be like, especially over 3 weeks. Like it could be snowing the one day and 70 the next. So that'll mess with your time a little bit, but you know that already.
Do you keep a thermometer on your scalder at all?
If I suspect a problem, I'll make sure I have a thermometer there. More or less these days, I don't. I rely on, I listen for my scalder because it's loud. The pilot's loud. So I want to make sure I know when it's coming on. I want to hear it. And then I want to hear the burner fire up. And as long as I'm hearing those things, I'm pretty happy. And then I watch my birds. Like if it starts taking, if I'm scalding for say 70 seconds and all of a sudden it starts taking 90 seconds or or longer or, 2 minutes,
Yeah.
then I want to know, I know something's wrong. Usually
Yeah.
those problems are incremental. Like it's 70
Sure.
seconds and then it's 85 and then it's like 95 for the next batch. Yeah. If you don't pay attention, next thing you know, it's like, oh, my water's all the way down to 135 because I ran out of propane.
Yeah. Been there. This might really be a question to get back with Eli about. With our we just did our last batch of broilers on Wednesday, I guess yesterday. All of a sudden, we seem to be getting much greater temperature fluctuations with the scalder. All this year, the burners would keep it within probably a 5-degree range, and then yesterday we were getting more like 10-degree ranges. So that kind of made things a little bit interesting yesterday. But have you ever encountered that?
Did you open up the panel and look at the burner at all when you were processing yesterday? I guess you probably saw it when you lit it. But
yeah, but didn't take a particularly close.
what I would ask, or what I would tell you to check out, is the flame itself. Like,
Okay.
is the flame still a nice blue flame that's 2 inches
right.
tall or something like that? Or is it? I wouldn't expect it to be smaller because you're still heating water regularly. But if it's a cooler flame, like an orange flame, and it's wild and jaggy and laps at the bottom of the scalder and builds up soot, then that could contribute to a longer recovery time because the flame's not as hot.
Gotcha.
And
that makes sense.
And the maintenance on that, and that's just something you have to do every once in a while. Like I don't know if you guys do it or not. You probably have. Drop the burners. In the burner, all those little holes are 3/32 of an inch. Just drill them out. So you just get your drill and just go through each hole. And that's a pretty small bit. So just be careful you don't break it off. I have a plugged hole or two with a 3/32 inch drill bit in it. If that's happening, that's the fix for it. And that might help you because on the Aquastat, it's conceivable that that's a problem with the Aquastat. But usually when I've seen them go bad, it's like, it does one thing or nothing. And the one thing could be it stays open so it doesn't turn the water off, or the heat off. So it continually heats the water. You can recover from that one if it happens while you're processing because you can manually turn your control knob off. If it goes the other way and it sticks closed where it doesn't actually turn the burner on, then you're putting your turkey fryer under the scalder to heat up water.
I do remember seeing a kind of a large wild orange flame there. So that would make sense that it's, maybe it's kicking on at the right time, but then it's still dropping temp while that warm instead of hot flame is having trouble.
That's basically just those holes becoming corroded, which they do, especially when they're exposed to the air, to the outside elements. Especially this time of year, you're starting to get wilder temperature swings, and there's been a lot of moisture in the air, and even wash down if you're hitting that burner with your hose with the water, all contributes to that. They just clog over time.
Makes sense.
And it restricts the airflow, and that's why your flame goes from the nice blue to the jaggy orange. I'm just curious, with that many turkeys, how do you crate them up for processing? Do you put them in a stock trailer, or do you actually have crates?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, we just load them onto a 16-foot stock trailer, take a few loads, and then with just some hog panels, we set up a corral around our. We basically just take 5-gallon buckets and sawzall a hole out of the bottom and use that as our kill cones for the turkeys. And so those are screwed onto a wall right in the processing area. So we just set up the corral kind of around that wall. So you're kind of just in there with the turkeys and pick one up and put it in the bucket.
My favorite site was always an empty stock trailer. How's your plastic bucket method work out? Do those buckets hold up, or?
Over the course of 4 processing days, I imagine we'll lose 2 or 3 out of 10. In general, it doesn't really slow us down during a processing day. The one thing on that we learned the hard way is that you don't want that hole to be too big, just big enough that you can kind of get your own hand up there to reach the turkey's head and kind of guide the head and neck through.
Right.
But if it's too big, what happens as they're dying, they start to convulse. If the hole's too big, their shoulder area, the kind of by the base of the neck, will scrape against that jagged plastic edge and start to rip the skin. So we learned that a few years ago when we kept, we had a bunch of batches come through the plucker, and it's like, why are all the shoulders ripped up? And so eventually figured that out. So you just want that hole to be small enough or big enough that you can get your hand through, but not much bigger.
Anything else, Jonathan? We covered all your questions?
Yeah, that covered everything that I had. But if you had anything else,
those are usually the big sticking points. I mean, the turkeys are really like a big chicken. They're just sometimes we do it in chicken or equipment that's geared towards chickens, and it makes it a little bit harder. But you actually have a good setup to handle those birds, because a bigger diameter tub and plucking specifically is like that's a big deal. Because otherwise, when you have to reach your hand in there, the Featherman doesn't use as much water, so it's not as bad. But the Poultry Man has an overhead shower. And if you have to reach your hand in there, then you're wet. Like the third week in November, and it's not always nice.
That's right. That's actually, we used to do fresh turkeys. We would have some frozen, but we would process real close to Thanksgiving to have fresh birds available. But enough days of doing that in 34-degree weather will convince you that people can buy frozen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation, that walk down the processing lane, so to speak, with Jonathan. Really great conversation. They weren't off by much. That's usually what you find in a lot of the cases. They had all the right equipment. They made some upgrades. I think that helped them have success when they put their 2018 processing in place. They did report back, Jonathan did report back after the fact that it said that 3 turkeys seemed to be the magic number. It was a good number for them to work through, and that kind of coincides with my point is just try those different chickens, or even turkeys in this case, in the scalder and the plucker, and see which one works best, because just because you can jam 4 or 5 turkeys into a plucker doesn't mean that you should. Doesn't mean you get any value out of doing that, right? Your efficiency may actually be from 1 or 2 less. So that was the point. I'm going to put some links and resources in the show notes out over at pasturepoultrytalk.com/96. That's where you'll find a lot of information for this episode, including the article that I wrote for the App of Grit, which summarizes the information in this episode in an article format. I published that recently in the Grit, so you'll be able to read that. And I really have a turkey cone that I love and adore, and we call it a super kill cone, because this thing is massive. It's mounted on an angle bracket. You just tack it to the barn, you tack it to a pole, you tack it to something solid. And I've put 60-pound turkeys into this thing, and it won't miss a beat. I like these super kill cones. I'm going to put a link out there. Just check it out. I encourage you to check it out. PasturePoultryTalk.com is where you want to go. Check out all the back episodes of this podcast, and hop on over to the Facebook group, Pasture Poultry Talk, and join that. Stay up to date, chat, talk about the shows, ask a question, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're doing. Until episode 97, we'll talk with you later. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.